Michael Harris had always believed in the strength of his marriage. He and Olivia had been married for almost 10 years, and in that time, they had weathered countless storms together. They had built a life that to anyone on the outside seemed picture perfect. Michael, a software engineer, had worked tirelessly to provide for their family, while Olivia, a freelance photographer, balanced her passion for art with raising their two children, Lily and Owen. Their home was filled with love, laughter, and memories. From the photos that adorned their living room walls to the family dinners they shared every evening, Michael had always felt that his marriage was unbreakable. He trusted Olivia implicitly, never questioning her actions or her words. To him, she was the embodiment of loyalty and devotion. But over the past year, things had started to change. At first, it was subtle, so subtle that Michael had barely noticed. Olivia had always been social, attending art galleries, photography workshops, and meeting with clients. But recently, her outings had become more frequent. She would leave the house early in the morning for a shoot and not return until late at night, sometimes well after the kids had gone to bed. When Michael asked her about it, she would brush it off with a smile and say, "Work's just been busy." There were other things, too, small details that Michael had initially dismissed as coincidence. Olivia had started dressing differently. Gone were the casual jeans and t shirts she usually wore while working from home. Instead, she now donned sleek, fitted dresses, often paired with high heels and expensive jewelry. She claimed it was part of her job, that she needed to look professional when meeting clients. Michael hadn't thought much of it at first. Olivia had always had a good sense of style, but something about the change seemed off. Then there was her phone. Olivia had always been open with her phone, leaving it lying around the house without a second thought. But in the past few months, she had become more guarded with it. Michael noticed that she would take it with her everywhere, even to the bathroom. When it buzzed with notifications, she would glance at the screen and quickly tuck it away, avoiding his gaze. One evening, after a long day at work, Michael sat in the living room, sipping a glass of wine while Olivia got ready for another night out. She had mentioned earlier that she was meeting a potential client for a late dinner, a client who was interested in commissioning her for a high profile photography project. Michael, as always, had been supportive. He was proud of Olivia's work and the recognition she had gained in her field. But as he sat there, watching her prepare in front of the bedroom mirror, something gnawed at him. She looked stunning, dressed in a fitted black dress that hugged her curves in all the right places. Her hair was perfectly styled and her makeup flawless. She seemed excited, more excited than she had been about anything in a long time. Michael stood up, walking over to the bedroom door, and leaned against the frame. "You look amazing," he said, his voice full of admiration. Olivia turned to face him, her smile warm but slightly guarded. "Thanks, babe," she replied, adjusting the strap of her dress. "I'm nervous about tonight. This could be a big opportunity for me." Michael nodded, stepping into the room. "I'm sure you'll do great. You always do." But as he wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her close for a kiss, he noticed something in her eyes. A flicker of hesitation, of distance. She kissed him back, but there was a coolness in her touch that Michael couldn't ignore. When they pulled apart, she turned back to the mirror, her smile faltering. "I'll be home late," she said, her voice casual. "Don't wait up." Michael forced a smile, but inside a knot of unease tightened in his chest. "Okay," he said, trying to keep his tone light. "Just be safe." Olivia nodded, grabbing her purse from the bed and giving him one last kiss on the cheek before heading out the door. As soon as she left, Michael's mind started racing. He had always trusted Olivia, but lately, that trust had been tested in ways he couldn't quite explain. The late nights, the guarded phone, the distant looks, it all felt wrong. But he couldn't bring himself to confront her, not without concrete evidence that something was going on. As he sat back down on the couch, sipping his wine, Michael's thoughts drifted to the past year. He replayed their interactions in his mind, looking for signs that he had missed. He thought about the times Olivia had come home late, her excuses always the same: work, clients, meetings. He thought about the weekends she had spent away for photography retreats, which, until now, he had never questioned. But the more he thought about it, the more suspicious he became. That night, Michael found himself unable to sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind consumed with doubt. He wanted to believe Olivia, wanted to trust that everything she had told him was true. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The next morning, when Olivia returned home, she was cheerful, acting as if nothing had changed. She kissed him on the cheek, poured herself a cup of coffee, and joined the kids at the breakfast table for the dining, laughing and chatting as if everything was perfectly normal. But Michael couldn't shake the sense of unease that had settled in his chest. Over the next few weeks, Michael's suspicions grew. He noticed that Olivia was spending more and more time away from home, often leaving without telling him where she was going or when she would be back. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages, but she never let him see who they were from. When he asked her about it, she would brush it off, claiming it was just work related. But the final straw came one Saturday afternoon. Michael had been working in the garage, fixing up an old bike for Owen when Olivia's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. She had left it there by mistake, and without thinking, Michael picked it up. He knew it was wrong, knew he shouldn't invade her privacy, but the curiosity was too strong. As he unlocked the phone, his heart sank. There, in the message thread, were dozens of texts from someone named David. The messages were flirty, playful, and far too intimate for a simple work relationship. One message in particular stood out. "Last night was incredible. I can't wait to see you again." Michael's hands trembled as he read the words, his mind racing. Who was David? And how long had this been going on? His stomach churned as he scrolled through the messages, each one confirming his worst fears. Olivia had been lying to him. She wasn't meeting clients, she was meeting David. The realization hit Michael like a punch to the gut. He felt sick, betrayed, and angry all at once. How could she do this to him? How could she betray their marriage, their family, after everything they had been through? When Olivia returned home later that afternoon, Michael was waiting for her in the living room. His heart pounded in his chest as he held her phone in his hand, the evidence of her betrayal laid bare before him. "Olivia," he said, his voice shaking with barely contained anger, "we need to talk." Olivia froze, her eyes widening as she saw the phone in his hand. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the tension in the room thick and suffocating. Then, slowly, Olivia's expression hardened and she crossed her arms over her chest. "What's this about, Michael?" she asked, her voice cold and defensive. Michael clenched his fists, his emotions boiling over. "I know about David," he said, his voice low but filled with fury. "I know everything." Michael's words hung in the air between them, heavy with accusation and pain. Olivia stood frozen for a moment, her eyes locked on the phone in Michael's hand. She blinked, and for a fleeting second, Michael saw something pass across her face. Guilt, fear, or maybe it was just exhaustion. But as quickly as it appeared, it was gone, replaced by a cold, steely expression that he barely recognized. "Michael, I don't know what you're talking about," Olivia said, her voice calm but edged with defensiveness. She stepped forward, her arms still crossed, her gaze steady. Michael clenched his jaw, his heart pounding in his chest. How could she lie so easily, so convincingly, when he had seen the proof with his own eyes? His grip tightened around her phone, the messages from David still open on the screen, taunting him with their flirtatious tone and the clear implication of what had been happening behind his back. "Don't play games with me, Olivia," Michael said through gritted teeth, his voice shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. "I saw the messages. I saw everything. You've been lying to me for months. You weren't working late. You weren't meeting clients. You were with him, David." Olivia's face paled slightly, and for the first time, Michael saw a crack in her carefully constructed mask. Her eyes flickered toward the phone in his hand, and for a moment she looked like she was about to say something, an explanation, an apology, anything. But instead, she let out a soft sigh and sank down onto the couch, her hands dropping limply into her lap. "Okay," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You're right. I've been seeing someone." Michael's world tilted on its axis. Even though he had already known the truth, had already seen the proof, he hadn't been prepared for her to admit it so easily. His legs felt weak, and he collapsed into the chair across from her, his mind spinning. "How long?" Michael asked, his voice low and strained. "How long has this been going on?" Olivia looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting together nervously. "A few months," she said quietly. "We met at one of the galleries. He's a client." "A client?" Michael repeated, his voice rising in disbelief. "Is that supposed to make this better? That you're sleeping with a client?" Olivia flinched at his words, but she didn't argue. She couldn't. The truth was out now, and there was no going back. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't plan for this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you." Michael let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "Well, you did a damn good job of it," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You didn't want to hurt me, but you've been lying to me for months. You've been sneaking around behind my back, spending nights with him while I sat at home, trusting you. How could you do this, Olivia? How could you betray me like this?" Tears welled up in Olivia's eyes, but she wiped them away quickly, her expression hardening again. "You don't understand," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I've felt so alone, Michael. You've been so consumed with work, with providing for the family, that you've barely even noticed me. I was drowning, and David, he made me feel seen." "Seen?" Michael repeated, his anger flaring again. "So this is my fault? I didn't pay enough attention to you, so you decided to find someone else who would?" Olivia shook her head, her tears spilling over. "No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not trying to blame you. I was lost, Michael. I didn't know how to fix things between us. And then David came along, and it just happened." Michael clenched his fists, his mind racing with conflicting emotions. He wanted to yell at her, to make her feel the same pain and betrayal that he was feeling. But more than anything, he wanted to understand why this had happened. Why had their marriage, which had once been so strong, fallen apart so completely? "Did you ever think about me?" Michael asked, his voice raw with emotion. "Did you ever think about how this would destroy me? Destroy our family?" Olivia looked up at him, her eyes filled with regret. "Of course I did," she whispered. "Every day. I hated myself for what I was doing, but I didn't know how to stop. I didn't know how to fix things with you." Michael's chest tightened, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. He had known that their marriage wasn't perfect, had known that things had been strained between them for a while, but he had never imagined that it would come to this. That Olivia, the woman he had loved and trusted for so many years, would turn to someone else for comfort. "Did you sleep with him?" Michael asked, his voice barely above a whisper, though he already knew the answer. Olivia's silence was deafening. Michael felt like he'd been punched in the gut. The confirmation, though unspoken, was clear. He stood up abruptly, pacing the length of the room as his mind spun with the implications of what she had just admitted. "You slept with him," Michael repeated, more to himself than to her. The words tasted bitter on his tongue. He stopped pacing and turned to face her, his eyes burning with a mix of anger and betrayal. "Where? Here? In our house? In our bed?" Olivia shook her head quickly, her tears falling faster now. She said, her voice shaking. "Never in our house. I would never do that." Michael let out a harsh laugh filled with bitterness. "Oh, well, that makes it so much better," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "At least you had the decency to not bring him into our home." Olivia sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "I'm sorry," she cried. "I'm so sorry, Michael. I never wanted this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you." Michael stood there, his heart pounding in his chest, his mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. Part of him wanted to walk out the door and never look back. Part of him wanted to scream at her, to make her feel the same pain he was feeling. But another part of him, the part that still loved her, despite everything, wanted to understand, wanted to know if there was any way to fix what had been broken. "Why, Olivia?" Michael asked, his voice cracking. "Why him? What did he give you that I couldn't?" Olivia looked up at him, her eyes filled with sorrow. "It wasn't about him," she whispered. "It was about me. I felt invisible, Michael. I felt like I was just going through the motions, like I wasn't even living my own life anymore. And then David, he made me feel alive again." "Alive?" Michael repeated, his voice filled with disbelief. "You think this is what it means to be alive? Lying, cheating, sneaking around behind my back?" Olivia didn't answer. She couldn't. The truth was too painful, too raw. She had made a terrible mistake, and now she was paying the price. As the weeks wore on, Michael found himself increasingly consumed by thoughts of David and Olivia. He pictured them together, laughing, talking, sharing intimate moments that should have belonged to him. He wondered what David was like. Was he younger, more charismatic? Did he make Olivia feel things that Michael hadn't been able to for years? Michael's anger only grew with each passing day. He had moved into the guest room, unable to share a bed with Olivia after everything that had happened. The tension in the house was suffocating, and their children had started to notice. Lily and Owen, too young to understand the complexities of what was going on, asked innocent questions that broke Michael's heart. "Daddy, why are you sleeping in the other room?" Owen had asked one morning, his big brown eyes wide with confusion. Michael had forced a smile, yet that it's small, ruffling Owen's hair as he replied, "Just for a little while, buddy. Don't worry about it." But the truth was, Michael didn't know how long he would be sleeping in the guest room. He didn't know if he would ever be able to go back to the way things had been before. The trust that had once been the foundation of their marriage had been shattered, and Michael wasn't sure if it could ever be rebuilt. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, Michael sat in the living room, nursing a glass of whiskey as he stared blankly at the television. He hadn't spoken to Olivia in days, and the silence between them had grown unbearable. He knew that something needed to change, that they couldn't keep living like this. But he didn't know how to move forward. Didn't know if there was a way to salvage what was left of their marriage. Just as he was about to pour himself another drink, Olivia appeared in the doorway, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "Michael," she said softly, her voice trembling, "we need to talk." Michael looked up at her, his heart heavy with a mix of anger, sadness, and exhaustion. He didn't want to talk. He didn't want to hear more excuses, more apologies, but he knew that they couldn't keep avoiding each other forever. "Okay," he said, setting his glass down on the coffee table. "Talk." Olivia took a deep breath, her hands shaking as she stepped further into the room. She looked at Michael, who sat on the edge of the couch, his eyes dull with exhaustion and hurt. The silence between them was thick, filled with words they hadn't said, with emotions they had both kept buried for weeks. "Michael," Olivia began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I know I've hurt you. I know what I did was wrong, and I'm not asking for forgiveness right now. But we can't keep living like this, avoiding each other, avoiding the truth." Michael's jaw tightened as he stared down at the glass of whiskey in his hand, swirling the liquid slowly. He didn't want to hear it. He didn't want to face this conversation. Didn't want to confront the reality that his marriage might be over. But Olivia was right. They couldn't keep living in this limbo, neither moving forward nor ending things. It was tearing them both apart, Mike, and it was affecting their kids. "I don't know if I can do this anymore, Olivia," Michael finally said, his voice low and hoarse. "I don't know if I have anything left to give." Olivia flinched at his words, tears welling up in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She had cried too many times already, and it hadn't changed anything. She needed to stay calm to try and make him understand. "I don't expect you to trust me right now," Olivia said softly. "I don't even expect you to love me the way you used to, but I want to try to make things right. I want to try to rebuild what we had." "What we had?" Michael scoffed, shaking his head. "Olivia, what we had is gone. You destroyed it the moment you decided to sleep with him. You can't just undo that. You can't just pretend it never happened." "I'm not trying to pretend it didn't happen," Olivia replied quickly, her voice pleading. "I know what I did. I know I betrayed you, but I still love you, Michael. I love our family, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove that to you." Michael's grip tightened around the glass in his hand, his knuckles turning white. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe that she truly regretted what she had done, that she was committed to fixing their marriage. But every time he looked at her, all he could see was the betrayal, the lies, the nights she had spent with David, the messages he had read that had shattered his world. "Do you?" Michael asked, his voice hard. "Do you really love me, Olivia? Because if you did, how could you do this? How could you go behind my back, lie to my face, and cheat on me for months?" Olivia's tears finally spilled over, and she wiped them away quickly, her hands trembling. "I don't have an excuse," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I was selfish, I was lost, I was stupid, but I never stopped loving you, Michael. Not for 1 second. Michael stood up abruptly, his emotions swirling inside him like a storm. He couldn't sit there and listen to her anymore. He couldn't keep hearing her say she loved him when her actions had proved the opposite. You say you love me, but you were sleeping with another man. Michael spat, his voice rising with anger. You were meeting him, texting him, lying to me every single day. How is that love, Olivia? How is that anything but betrayal? I know, Olivia cried, her voice desperate. I know it was betrayal. I know I hurt you in the worst way possible. But I'm here, Michael. I'm standing here telling you that I want to fix this. I want to fix us. Michael let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head as he paced the room. Fix us? How are you supposed to fix something that's broken beyond repair? Olivia watched him, her heart breaking all over again. She knew he had every right to be angry, to hate her for what she had done. But she couldn't give up. Not yet. Not when there was still a chance, no matter how small, that they could save their marriage. I don't know, Olivia whispered, her voice trembling. I don't know how to fix this, but I'm willing to try. I'm willing to go to therapy, to cut off all contact with David, to do whatever it takes to make things right. Michael stopped pacing and turned to face her, his eyes filled with pain and anger. And what about me? He asked, his voice low and strained. What am I supposed to do, Olivia? Am I just supposed to forget about everything you did? Am I supposed to forgive you and pretend like none of it ever happened? No, Olivia replied softly, shaking her head. I don't expect you to forget. I don't even expect you to forgive me right away. But I'm asking you to give me a chance. To give us a chance. Michael stared at her, his chest heaving with emotion. He had spent weeks trying to figure out what he wanted. Whether he could ever truly forgive Olivia, whether he could ever trust her again. And now, standing there in front of her, he still didn't have the answers. I don't know if I can, Michael admitted, his voice cracking. I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again. Olivia's heart shattered at his words, but she nodded, understanding the depth of his pain. I know, she whispered. I know I've broken your trust, and I know it's going to take time to rebuild that, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Michael ran a hand through his hair, his mind spinning. Part of him wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that they could somehow rebuild what had been broken. But another part of him, the part that was still raw with hurt and anger, didn't know if that was possible. I need time, Michael said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I need time to figure out if I can do this. Olivia nodded, tears streaming down her face. Take all the time you need, she whispered. I'm not going anywhere. The weeks that followed were some of the most difficult of Michael's life. He had told Olivia that he needed time, but the truth was, he didn't know if time would make a difference. Every day was a struggle, a battle between the love he still felt for her and the anger that continued to simmer beneath the surface. Olivia, for her part, had done everything she could to prove that she was committed to fixing their marriage. She cut off all contact with David, deleting his number from her phone and blocking him on every platform. She started going to therapy, both on her own and with Michael, in an attempt to understand why she had made the choices she had and how they could move forward. But despite her efforts, the distance between them remained. Michael couldn't shake the image of Olivia and David together, couldn't stop picturing the moments they had shared, the intimacy they had stolen from him. And every time he looked at her, he was reminded of the betrayal. One night, as they lay in separate rooms, Michael in the guest room, Olivia in their bedroom, Michael stared at the ceiling, his mind racing. He had been trying to forgive her, trying to move past what had happened, but the anger and hurt still clung to him like a shadow. He didn't know if he could ever truly let it go. As the weeks turned into months, Michael and Olivia continued to attend therapy together, working through the layers of pain and mistrust that had built up between them. There were moments when Michael felt like they were making progress, moments when he could look at Olivia and remember the woman he had fallen in love with all those years ago. But there were also moments when the weight of her betrayal felt too heavy to bear, moments when the thought of what she had done threatened to crush him. Their children, Lily and Owen, had started to sense the tension between them, though they were too young to fully understand what was happening. They asked innocent questions, questions that made Michael's heart ache. "Daddy, why don't you sleep in Mommy's room anymore?" Lily had asked one morning, her big brown eyes filled with confusion. Michael had forced a smile, ruffling her hair as he replied, "It's just for a little while, sweetie. Don't worry." But the truth was, Michael didn't know if he would ever be able to share a bed with Olivia again. He didn't know if he would ever be able to look at her without feeling the sting of betrayal. One evening, after a particularly grueling therapy session, Michael sat alone in the living room, nursing a glass of whiskey as he stared out the window. The house was quiet. Olivia had taken the kids to her parents' house for the weekend, giving them both some space to think. Michael's mind raced as he thought about the past few months, the countless therapy sessions, the late-night conversations, the moments of hope that had been quickly overshadowed by doubt. He didn't know what to do. He didn't know if he could ever truly forgive Olivia for what she had done. Just as he was about to pour himself another drink, his phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen and saw a text from Olivia. "Can we talk? I'm ready to come home." Michael stared at the message for what felt like an eternity. His mind was swirling with conflicting emotions. Part of him wanted to ignore the text, to let the silence stretch out a little longer, to keep her at a distance just as he had been doing for weeks. But another part of him, the part that still loved her despite everything, knew that they couldn't keep running from this forever. The truth was, he had no idea what he was going to say. He had no idea how to respond to her or how to face the reality of their situation. But ignoring it would only delay the inevitable. His fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before he finally typed out a short reply. "Come home." It was all he could manage. He didn't know what to expect, but he knew that the time had come for them to face each other and figure out what came next. Olivia returned home later that evening, her face pale and tired as she stepped through the front door. The kids were still with her parents, giving them the privacy they needed for what would undoubtedly be another difficult conversation. Michael was waiting for her in the living room, nursing his second glass of whiskey, the tension in the room palpable. They stood there for a moment, facing each other, but not saying a word. The weight of their unresolved issues hung between them like a thick fog, and neither of them knew how to break through it. "Thank you for letting me come home," Olivia finally said, her voice soft and hesitant. Michael nodded but remained silent, his eyes fixed on the floor. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know if he had the strength to do this again. Olivia walked over and sat down on the couch, clasping her hands together in her lap. "Michael, I know we've been going in circles for months now, and I know I've hurt you more than I can ever make up for, but I need to know where we stand. I need to know if there's any chance for us to move forward." Her voice trembled with emotion, and Michael could hear the desperation in her words. But instead of answering, he simply sat back down in his chair, his mind still racing with everything that had happened between them. He couldn't deny that he still loved her. Despite all the pain, despite the betrayal, the love hadn't gone away. But love alone wasn't enough to fix what had been broken. "I don't know," Michael said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can ever get past this, Olivia." Olivia's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded slowly, as if she had been expecting this answer all along. "I understand," she whispered. "I know it's not something that can be fixed overnight, but I need to know if you even want to try." Michael looked up at her, his chest tightening with the weight of the question. Did he want to try? Was there even a point in trying, or was it all just delaying the inevitable? "I want to," he said finally, his voice strained with emotion. "But I don't know if I can. Every time I look at you, I think about what you did. I think about him. I think about the lies. And it kills me inside, Olivia. I don't know how to stop that." Tears spilled down Olivia's cheeks, and she wiped them away quickly, her hands shaking. "I'm so sorry, Michael," she whispered. "I wish I could take it all back. I wish I could undo everything I've done, but I can't. All I can do is promise you that I'll never hurt you like that again." Michael let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "Promises don't mean much to me anymore," he said, his voice laced with bitterness. "You promised me fidelity when we got married, and look how that turned out." Olivia flinched at his words, but she didn't argue. She knew he was right. She had broken the most sacred promise she had ever made, and there was no way to undo that. I know, she whispered, and I'm not asking for your forgiveness right now. I know it's going to take time, if it ever happens, but I need to know if you're willing to let me try, if you're willing to let me earn your trust back. Michael's heart ached as he looked at her. He could see how broken she was, how much she regretted everything that had happened, but he was broken too, and he didn't know if two broken people could ever rebuild something as fragile as trust. I don't know how to trust you again, Michael admitted, his voice cracking with emotion. I don't know if I ever will. Olivia sobbed quietly, her head bowed as she tried to keep her composure. I understand, she whispered, but I'm not giving up on us, Michael. Not yet. Not until I know for sure that there's nothing left to save. The room fell silent again, both of them lost in their own thoughts. Michael stared into his glass, his mind swirling with everything they had been through. He knew he couldn't keep living like this, caught between love and betrayal, hope and despair. But the thought of ending things, of tearing apart their family, was too painful to bear. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Michael looked up at Olivia. His eyes were filled with a sadness that cut through her like a knife. I need time, he said softly. I don't know how much time, but I need it. I need to figure out if I can ever move past this. Olivia nodded, her tears falling freely now. Take all the time you need, she whispered. I'll be here. The weeks that followed were a slow, painful process of healing, if it could even be called that. Michael and Olivia continued to attend therapy together and trying to work through their issues, but the progress was slow and the road was long. There were good days, days when they laughed together, when they shared moments that reminded them of the love they had once had. But there were also bad days, days when the pain resurfaced, when the memories of what had happened threatened to tear them apart all over again. Michael struggled with his feelings daily. He wanted to move on, to let go of the anger and hurt, but it was easier said than done. Every time he thought they were making progress, something would trigger the memories of Olivia's betrayal, and the anger would come rushing back, overwhelming him all over again. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Michael turned to Olivia, his heart heavy with the weight of everything they had been through. I miss us, he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. I miss the way things used to be. Olivia looked over at him, her eyes filled with sadness. I do too, she whispered. But we can't go back to that, Michael. We can only move forward. Michael nodded, knowing she was right. The life they had before was gone, and there was no getting it back. But maybe, just maybe, they could build something new, something stronger, something more resilient. It's not going to be easy, Michael said softly, but I want to try. Olivia's heart swelled with hope as she reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. Me too, she whispered. The months that followed were far from perfect, but they were better. Michael and Olivia worked hard to rebuild their relationship, to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. It wasn't easy, and there were days when they both felt like giving up, but they didn't. They kept fighting, kept showing up for each other, even when it was hard. Their therapy sessions became a safe space for them to talk openly about their fears and their doubts, and slowly the wounds began to heal. One evening, as they sat together in the backyard, watching Lily and Owen play, Michael turned to Olivia, his expression soft. I'm glad we didn't give up, he said quietly. Olivia smiled, her eyes shining with tears. Me too, she whispered. Their marriage wasn't perfect, and it never would be. But they had learned that perfection wasn't the goal. The goal was to keep trying, to keep showing up for each other, even when things were hard. And for now, that was enough.